Everyone out there in YouTube land, Danny for Geekcast Radio, doing another comic book review. This time I'm going to continue my look at the Extermination miniseries that's been going on. We are now on issue 2, and if you saw my first issue review, I talked about it that I did like it. I wasn't enamored by it. I thought it had some pieces that were promising, but I wasn't exactly sure if this would separate itself from a lot of the classic X-Men stories that it very is reminiscent of. And with the second issue, I don't necessarily know if that has been fully established yet, like if this is heads and tails better than the first issue, but I will say I am really liking this series, ultimately because it just feels like an X-Men story. And sometimes it's all it takes in a way. And I was wondering, why is that? Like, this feels like kind of like the fun and exciting type of X-Men stories that I enjoy, and a lot of it is the small bits and pieces of it. And I will preface by saying, talking about this, I will probably have to spoil some of the other elements that happen in issue 1, if they haven't already been spoiled for you first. But with this, what we see is a X-Men team that, as often is the case, is kind of on their heels. Things are not going the way that they need to. People are dying. In this case, Cable. Bobby Drake is missing. They think maybe he's dead, and there's actually a pretty good bit in this regarding Beast and old Bobby Drake, talking about, well, if old Bobby Drake's here, we know young Bobby Drake isn't really alive, or is still alive, because if that wasn't the case, then old Bobby Drake would disappear like that happened before. And then talking about time paradoxes and just the insanity of the X-Men world, and how sometimes anytime you insert time travel into a story, things can get a little bit messy. And it's like, well, for example, killing a character like Cable, I always feel like there's no stakes in that, because when you have a character that is time travels, technically he can come back at any time in a way, right? Because although his present self is dead, his future self could come back at any point in time. So it's, I don't know, like, killing Cable, to me, it's happened so many times, like him and Professor Xavier. Really, anyone that is, the Gray family is just notorious for dying. It's like what they do. But it's also scenes like this, where it's just the X-Men and them hanging out together, all together in a room, and just the insanity of the team on display, from Angel to to Logan, to just seeing the X-Men, all these different groups, X-Men blue, red, yellow, orange, whatever colors they are, kind of hanging out and discussing the situation, coming up with a plan of attack, how they're going to fix this, and then immediately going against that plan and it not working out. And that's pretty much what this is. And just like people trying to, insert Kitty Pryde kind of taking the Scott Summers role, the Cyclops role. Rachel Gray also kind of realizing that, there's a lot of regret in this issue from throughout these different characters, from Scott Summers, young Scott Summers, for allowing Moonstar, the character Bloodstone, I forget her name, I apologize, getting killed last issue, to Rachel Gray feeling like she should have saw this coming because of the marks that appeared back on her face, to these X-Men in general feeling like they're here in the present. They were brought here for a purpose, and nothing's gotten better. It's just nothing has changed. Things are just as bad as they were when they got here, which is very true. And it kind of just it's just, I think, reminiscent of the fact that there's nothing really more for these characters to do, and ultimately did them coming provide anything? Like, what was the purpose of it? And hopefully this will kind of get to some sort of purpose. Right now we just see them reacting and trying to figure things out, and that's what I do like. There are small twists within this issue that aren't necessarily groundbreaking. There's no major death in this issue. It's no like, oh, this was this person the entire time. But what I think we do see is that there's just some quick remarks. For example, like this young Cable that is going around trying to take out the original X-Men, and his reaction to Jean Grey being there, young Jean Grey being there. Little odd, like where is that coming from? What does that exactly mean? And I feel like they've been laying that out from the first issue, just little breadcrumbs here and there. Ahab talking about how there's vampire mutants in the future, Ahab being there. It just seems like there's a lot really going on here that may not all be solved in this issue. And knowing that This will eventually lead into the weekly X-Men series, Uncanny X-Men series. I feel like if by the end of this, I wouldn't be surprised if not much changes. Perhaps there are some, I would say, some rather disturbing, shocking moments in this involving one of the original X-Men. Again, no one dies, but it was a pretty, it was pretty graphic. Not necessarily because it was shown on screen, but certainly you could feel what was happening. Although it's not something that hasn't happened before. What I do like about this, which sometimes could be weird, is that I don't actually know at all what right now is the purpose, in the sense of what is Cable's agenda, the young Cable's agenda. Is it Cable? Is it maybe perhaps Strife? The Cable clone. We see young Cable going around trying to take out these different characters, and what it eventually is he doing? Cable is that type of character that often will go off on his own, and you think he's doing evil things, or he's going after certain people, but in the long run, his objective is valid. We did see in the future that he was coming from a future that the X-Men have been killed and defeated, so perhaps there is something else going on here. Still don't. Ahab keeps showing up, and he's going after all these different people. He's trying to go after the X-Men. Why exactly is that? We don't know as of yet. But I just feel like the interaction with these characters are spot on. It's being able to point out kind of the oddity of these X-Men and kind of give them all the opportunity to shine. A lot of the interaction between like Old Beast and young Hank McCoy I did enjoy. So I'm glad that this may not be full with gigantic action set pieces in this issue, but the character moments are working. And I think that ultimately is why, when I said this feels like an X-Men comic, that's to me what's always great about the X-Men, even from the films, is that the relationships are always on a different level when it comes to superheroes, because even something like the Fantastic Four, because they're a family not by by blood but by choice, and just the conflicts that can ensue. And they're talking, they all come from hugely weird backgrounds, from different alternate futures to from the past. And when you try to put all those people into a room to try to solve a problem, all have their own agendas. Only bad things can happen. And then too, this book ends off with a decent cliffhanger that I thought it did a good job foreshadowing. Without me, I was wondering exactly what was going on there, as they talk about a certain character's hands being weird, and then by the end we see, which then again raises a whole lot of other questions. Again, I don't want to spoil it for those that haven't read it, but it's not necessarily a cliffhanger that's bent upon someone dying, which I think sometimes can get a little bit redundant. So I'm glad it's not like I'm just going to go around and every issue someone's going to die. Sometimes I feel like that is usually the go-to for big stories like this. And this is building itself as the biggest X-Men event. And what's with that, though, it doesn't feel big, but in a good way. It does feel like this is very isolated within these characters, so that scope isn't taking out kind of that intimacy you'd want with the character interaction. I think sometimes big events can feel very stale or thin because it's all about the event, and the actual people within it are left behind. This doesn't seem to be the case as far. Is it the best X-Men event I've ever read, or is this an all-time story? I mean, that's way too early to say. I wouldn't necessarily say that, but as a person, that's X-Men is my first go-to when it comes to comics. This is one of the better X-Men comics I've read in some time, and it's getting better and better as it goes on. But it's also it's compared to, I think, one of the worst X-Men periods we've had in some time. So it could just be a product of not having high expectations. But ultimately, I think it does at least have me excited for where it's going next, and really excited to see what eventually leads into the Uncanny coming back. So if you're worried, I would say though, this is not a great series to go into if you are brand new to the X-Men world, because this it would be rather confusing. It's not, I think, super welcoming to new readers. But if you're someone who maybe gave up on X-Men Blue and Red, and like myself, or I've kept reading Red, X-Men Gold and Yellow and Red and whatever you want to call them. If you're not reading the X-Men, but at least have somewhat of a knowledge of them, I think you can pick this up and follow along for the most part. But again, it's just shots like this that kind of keep me coming back, of just the X-Men being the X-Men, and excited to see where it goes next, and kind of happy that we're getting that Uncanny back. But let me know what you think in the comment section below. Have you been keeping up with Extermination? Are you looking forward to the Uncanny when it comes back? I think they did announce the first issue is going to be $8. Not ideal. I really wish they would stop doing that. But I gotta say, at least like this is making me more and more willing to pay that, even though I'd rather them just like, just that's a whole nother discussion for a whole nother day. But ultimately, looking at this comic, I definitely think it's worth the read for sure. I'm excited for 2 weeks when another next issue comes out. But alrighty, that's it for me. Just remember, comics are for everyone. The key is finding the right one. Until next time, thanks for watching.